podcast with Maryland Focus and Howard County Roots. My name's Tom Cole, and I'm self-quarantined still in my home and connected via the internet to my co-host, Candace Dodson-Reed. Candace, how are you today?
I'm a little worn and a little solemn. You know, we've talked about this a little bit before the show, but it's been a rough week, you know, both at the local level and the national level with these blatant acts of hate and disrespect against Black folks. And then we have another death, of course, of a Black man in the custody of police. It's traumatic. It's exhausting to continue to try to have these conversations with my daughter. And I know my friends are experiencing the same thing because I've spoken to many of them today. It's a lot. But because timing is sometimes everything, my soul feels a little bit better tonight because we have the opportunity to talk with Bishop Leah Daughtry. And I know this is going to be good, so I feel a little bit better today. I really do.
Yeah, you know, under many circumstances like this, we might not even have the show, but you and I talked, and the timing was perfect, and our guest is perfect for today. Before we officially introduce our guest, normally on this part of the show, we would do our 3 things we're thinking about. Today, we're not. Normally, our 3 things are things that we think need to be discussed and want to talk about, but in light of everything that's going on right now, talk isn't enough, and now's the time for action. And so what you and I discussed is no 3 things, and let's start moving towards action. It's not about reading the next article. It's not about listening to a progressive podcast or watching another video. It's time to act. So,
and so there'll be more on that, and I know we'll figure out how to do things in the right way for us and for our community. And so more on that, I'm sure. And now with that, I would like to officially welcome our guest to the show. Bishop Leah Daughtry is a nationally recognized organizer, activist, political strategist, author, and faith leader. She serves as Presiding Prelate of the House of the Lord Churches. Daughtry is a principal of On These Things, LLC, a strategic planning and project management firm that builds and supports partnerships that advance the common good. She is also co-convenor of Power Rising, which brings together Black women and girls to leverage their power for the benefit of their communities. Standing at the intersection of faith and politics, Daughtry has served as Chief of Staff to the U.S. Department of Labor and the National Democratic Party, as well as CEO of the 2008 and 2016 Democratic National Conventions, making her the first person in Democratic Party history to hold the position twice. For her work with communities of faith, Religion and News Service named her one of the dozen most effective Democrats in the nation on faith and values politics. She is also the co-author of the NAACP Image Award winning for colored girls who have considered politics. The daughter of a long line of community organizer activists, Leah represents the 5th consecutive generation of clergy persons in the Daughtry family. A native of Brooklyn, New York, she is a graduate of Dartmouth College. I know we have some Dartmouth alum listening on the show right now. And Wesley Theological Seminary. Welcome to the show. We are so happy to have you with us here.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. When we scheduled this, we didn't know we would be in quarantine, but nevertheless, thanks to your good planning, here we are. Look forward to the conversation.
Great, thank you. So we are going to hop right into it. We know you did your Wednesday word, and I told you this, I listened to it today. But I'd like to start by giving you an opportunity to talk about the events of the past couple of days and weeks. We could actually go back probably months and years or even further, but we wanted to open with your thoughts on Christian Cooper and the tragic loss of George Floyd, as well as the subsequent actions and conversations that have happened.
Yeah, you know, I did talk a little bit about this on Wednesday Word. For those unfamiliar, I do a Wednesday midweek meditation moment on Facebook Live every Wednesday at noon. And I was sharing today that how hard these last couple of weeks have been between, you know, the arrest of the killers of Ahmaud Arbery, including the 3rd dude who was, you know, filming everything. And then George Floyd and Christian Cooper. And it's just seemed, you know, one thing after another that is an assault on Black bodies, Black lives. That combined with the daily news about the disproportionate impact that COVID is having on Black and brown communities, it just becomes a bit overwhelming at times. And, you know, I have to say, because I'm from an activist household and we've been working on issues of police abuse of power since I was a little girl. So these things are not new, which is its own problem. What's new is now we have the social media means that we can find out about them. The nation finds out about them more quickly. And I think that magnifies the impact and the import and the assault on our own psyches and our own bodies as we're dealing with them. You know, and something I didn't talk about today that I'm finding annoying when we're talking about Christian Cooper. And it's this tendency of the media and the commentators to list his resume. He's Harvard educated and president of the Audubon Society, and he's a birder, and he writes comic books that we've read. And it's this subtle implication that he's one of the good ones. And he got all these qualifications. And so this should not have happened to a man like Christian Cooper, because look who he is and look what he's done. And that bugs me, because whether he's educated, uneducated, had a job, likes birds, doesn't like birds, not whatever his hobbies are, whatever his education is, wherever he was, he did not deserve that. And this asterisk by his name, and I'm proud of the brother for all of his accomplishments, but that really has no place in this story. This was a woman who was lying, and we all saw it. She was manufacturing facts. Talk about fake news. And then the drama of it all, as we listen to her voice escalate, as she's creating this whirlwind for the people at 911, as though 911 is her personal service. It's, you know, it's distressing. And, you know, we're in our houses, quarantined, so we're processing this in many cases alone. And I think that's part of the tragedy of this, that we can't go to friends' homes and to gathering spots to sort of process this hurt and this grief and this anger together. And so, you know, it's what do we do about it, and how do we make things different? I'm gratified that in the Lloyd case that the officers have been fired immediately. We didn't get we're going to do an investigation. We didn't get any of that. They were fired. I need to know, when will they be arrested and arraigned and brought up on charges? That hasn't happened yet. I'm waiting for that. So I think it's just, you know, more of the sign of our times and the state of our nation in the times that we live. And it's tragic, and we have to figure out how we navigate our way through this.
Candace, I'm not going to take your question about the story. I'm going to go in a different direction real quick. And that is, where should this conversation go? Because very often it is incident by incident. And as you identified, we get down into the details of the incident and we lose track of the system that creates it and makes room for it. So I'm curious, what you would say is, where can we take this conversation next, so that something that happens in Minnesota or New York or the South, where can it be universally applied wherever we are?
You know, I think these sorts of incidents are carried out by people, some of whom are blatantly racist, and some of them would call themselves progressive and would call themselves allies till they get in a tough spot, and then, you know, what goes in, what comes out just comes out. Mm-hmm. So I think part of what needs to happen is really, we've got to have the conversations, the difficult, hard conversations that nobody wants to have around race, sexism, homophobia, all the phobias. We've got to have them, but we've got to have them with our friends. I don't need white people to come and tell me about how they're in solidarity with me and they feel the pain. I need you to go have that conversation with your girlfriend, because Miss Cooper from last night, up until last night, probably wouldn't have called herself racist. Her friends wouldn't have called herself racist, but clearly there was something happening there. And we got to peel this onion, and the best way to peel it is for folks to have the conversations in their own circles, among their own friends, and get clear, and then come have a conversation with me. And I think until we want to have those conversations and say to our friend, girl, that's not right. Did you hear what you said?
Mm-hmm.
Did you see what you did? Why are you letting your son do blah, blah? Why are you allowing your daughter to, we have to, and until we do that and are willing to have those conversations in our own circles, among ourselves, with our friends, until white people are ready to do that, then we're just raising another generation and another generation and another generation where we look the other way, or we say, but what about the rest of the videotape? We only saw a little bit of it. What happened before that? There was nothing that happened before that that caused that officer to put his knee on that man's neck. You don't need to see the rest of the video. But until we are willing to do that personal work, there's nothing the system, whatever the system is going to do about that. The system is a compilation of the actions of the people. The system is propagated by the people. So if the people are not going to change, the system stays the same.
Candace, can I ask a follow-up?
Absolutely.
So that is such an important framing. And one of the responses that may be offered is white people don't decide what's racist in both directions. White people don't decide what's racist. It is racist, and white people certainly don't decide what isn't racist. I know in previous discussions with guests that we've had on the show, it's a listening component first. But I would be curious if you could answer that component, because, for instance, today we had an incident locally where our African-American county executive, there was a rally specifically targeting him, and many of those who were defending that rally were saying, oh, look, a bunch of white people are telling us racist. White people don't get to tell us racist. So I'm curious if you could address that, or just, I guess, comment on that.
I don't understand. So say more about that. So white people don't get to tell us what's racist?
So I want to preface this by saying, I don't think white people do get to decide what's racist. White people need to listen, and they need to do a lot of listening before they start engaging. However, once you have, when you say you need to take Ms. Cooper out for a coffee and say, don't do that. What is the context to that in terms of what would you recommend that process be for purported allies, those that want to be in a position of allyship? How do they get themselves to that stage where they can competently represent to those that are acting wrong what is racist?
Well, I think there is a lot of listening that has to be involved, but I don't have the bandwidth to teach white people about racism. I can't do it. I got too much else going on, and I did say that's most Black people. But there are books you can read, there's observation, and listen, you don't have to have a cat to recognize what a cat looks like. There are some actions that are blatantly racist that should make you uncomfortable, where you can say to your friend, do you realize that what you just did is problematic? Do you realize, let's play that back. How does that feel? When I was CEO at a convention in Philadelphia, we were meeting with one of the vendors who wanted a major contract and clearly had never heard of Google. So he came to our office, and I'm very timely. I met him in the conference room. I said hello, sat down, and he said, well, aren't we going to wait for the CEO? And I said, you want to wait for the CEO? Yes. Thank you so much for greeting us, but I would like to wait for the CEO. Is that your comment? I said, okay. So my chief of staff walks in, white man. He assumed that was the CEO.
Right.
Clearly, Google is your friend. And if anyone had Googled, so it's like, one, you did no homework, which means,
right.
I don't know, what contract you're expecting to do, but why does your assumption automatically jump to, she can't be it, it must be him? There's an undercurrent of assumption that was happening in the stories he's been telling himself about what CEOs look like, act like, and sound like, that allowed him to walk into my office with that attitude. We see that among our friends. I went to Dartmouth. I see more racist than, than a little bit, but it's one thing for me to have that conversation. It's another thing for you to have that conversation, or for you to have the conversation both as a white man, but also as with folks who are maybe differently economically situated, or who are from a different gender loving, sexual identities, to say that comment wasn't cool. And I'm not okay with that. And so I'm going to push back on you, and I'm not going to I'm not going to have my child around it. I'm not going to have my daughter. I don't want to be part of that, because, man, that's wrong. And let me help you understand why it's wrong. And I don't think people of goodwill need a whole education about that to know what's right and what's wrong. And if you're not sure, you can ask somebody, did this sit right with you? Am I right about this? And we'd be happy to have that conversation. But I don't know how many of us want to do racism 101.
I hope most of Howard County is listening, and the rest of the state too, and the country. So let's talk a little bit about you. We get such rich answers when we ask our guests to tell our listeners about themselves. So please tell us the Reverend Leah Daughtry story.
Oh boy. I'm a Black chick from Brooklyn, born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, to activist parents who are also clergy people. I am myself a 5th generation clergy person. Our first generation of ministers was we called him Uncle Rob, but he was my great grandfather, and he was a slave on the Daughtry plantation in Georgia. And we've been in ministry ever since then, but our particular brand of ministry is one that is what today we would call social justice ministry. Back then it was just activism. So I grew up in a very activist household, very religious. We were and are Pentecostal, so that meant I was in church pretty much every day of the week. And so those two things wrapped together for me. I'm the oldest of 4 children, so I'm naturally bossy. And if you listen to me and do what I tell you, your life will be perfect. Oldest child syndrome.
Right.
But I well educated. My dad growing up told us, you have one job: get your books. That's your job. We were not allowed to work. The only work we had was to get your books. And that's what we did. So we all went to the college. He said, go to the best school you can get into, the best school that you want to go to. And so I wound up at Dartmouth, as did my next sister. My sister after that went to Syracuse, and my brother went to the University of Chicago and Georgetown Law School. I came to Washington back in the 80s and worked for my hometown congressman, having interned for him when I was in college. And then I went to the DNC, and I worked for Ron Brown, the first African-American chairman of the party. And he hired me to work on the 1992 Democratic Convention. And that was the first convention I'd ever been to. It was in New York City, my hometown. And so I got a good trial by fire in my own city. And I've worked on, I think, every convention since then, except for Chicago. I didn't do Chicago 96. And so I guess that's 6 or 7 different conventions. And so that's the short bit of it. And after the DNC, when we won and Clinton became president, I was sick of Washington and its merry-go-round, everybody with a business card, networking ways. And I went back to Brooklyn, which is what I do when I get tired of Washington. I moved back home to Brooklyn, and I started a not-for-profit with my church called Sister to Sister, which is a mentoring program for young women. And we had a companion program called Man to Man, and we built a not-for-profit agency with daycare and other kinds of programs at our church. And eventually I came back here and served in the U.S. Department of Labor for working for Secretary Alexis Herman, the first African-American Secretary of Labor. I worked for her for 4 years while she was secretary. I had worked for her when she was chief of staff at the DNC. I've been trailing in her footsteps ever since. Chief of staff at the DNC, CEO of the convention, and then at the Labor Department. And I went back to the DNC when Terry was chair. Terry McAuliffe was chair. I was his chief of staff. and Howard Dean was his chief of staff, and then I served as CEO of the 2008 and 2016 conventions. In the middle of all that, I started a church.
Oh my gosh.
Started as a Bible study and grew into a church. I'm no longer pastor, but I lead our denomination, which is a network of churches across the country, and I serve as the presiding prelate for that organization. In addition to any number of things, I'm a co-founder of Black Church PAC, which brings together Black church leaders to do voter education, mobilization among our communities using the church as a base. I'm on the board of Higher Heights for America, which works to elect Black women to political office. I co-founded Power Rising, as you mentioned earlier, and I got, I just joined the advisory board of the Katie Geneva Cannon Center at Methodist Seminary. So I got a lot going on, and I am child free, but I have 3 nephews, are 30, 15, and almost 13, June 1st, 13, and I have 1 grandniece who is 2.5.
Oh.
And they are all in New York right now. And the quarantine was hitting. I was in Washington then, and I decided I would stay here. I figured it would last 2 weeks, and then I would go home to New York, but I've been stuck here in DC ever since. So that's my life in a snapshot.
Thank you for that.
Well, we want to build off of your career and how it lays at the intersection of faith and politics. It's obviously a very interesting place to work, and also offers you perspectives that can help a country such as ours that is so divided and sometimes seems more divided by the day. We're in the middle of a health crisis that is further highlighting disparities, as you referenced before, not just in health, but also in education and housing. If you were advising elected officials on, or even the party as a whole, on where we should look and where we should work to start addressing these challenges, what would you tell them?
Well, my friend, Dr. Aubrey Hendricks, wrote a wonderful book that's entitled The Politics of Jesus.
Ooh.
And in that book, he has a quote that I use often, and that really gets to the heart of your question. And that quote is, treat the people's needs as holy. Treat the people's needs as holy. That is to say, if we honor and recognize that each of us is created in the image of God, or by whatever name you choose to call him or her, if we honor the value of each other's lives, then we honor what we need in order to live full, thriving, and abundant lives. And that can be very basic: clean air and clean water, good, nutritious food to eat, safe environment in which to grow and to raise our children, and the ability to pursue our dreams in an even-handed, fair, equitable way. Treat the people's needs as holy. And so I would say to elected officials, as I have, and to the party as I have, let's deal with the people's needs. Because if you have a society where everyone feels valued and valuable, and where everyone has the opportunity to pursue their version of the American dream, then we build a nation that thrives, that sees each other and welcomes the stranger to our happy camp, because we're all getting what we need to have the life that we want to have, recognizing everyone's version of the American dream is different. And that's okay in an America where we all are valued and valuable. So let's focus on what people need to thrive and survive, not what we think they need, but what they tell us they need. And let's reflect that back to them and build policies and programs and legislation that reflects those values.
Let's talk a little bit about the Democratic National Convention in 2008. You were the CEO of the convention, as you mentioned, and you oversaw a convention where President Barack Obama became the party's first non-white nominee. I was cheering from the couches and yelling and screaming, and I'm sure Tom was too. There was an immense sense of pride. And so please walk us through what that was like for you.
Walk you through what that night was like, or the planning?
Absolutely.
You know, it was, we had made the decision to have that night, the final night of the acceptance speech at Mile High Stadium. Now, that in and of itself was a huge undertaking because that decision, if you remember, Obama became the presumptive nominee very late. It was June, and the convention was at the end of August. So it was about 3 weeks after he became the nominee that they decided, they informed us that they wanted to have the last night at Invesco or Mile High Stadium. So we had to scramble and figure out how to make that work logistically, which we did. But part of what people didn't get to see, the logistics behind the scene, is that there weren't enough magnetometers in the state of Colorado. There wasn't enough bike rack and security equipment in the state of Colorado to be able to secure the Pepsi Center where we had been Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Invesco at the same time. So you had to make a decision, which we made the logical decision, let's secure Invesco. And of course, Secret Service has to come in and sweep and all of that sort of thing to make it secure. So after the Wednesday night session ended, we loaded all of the necessary equipment onto golf carts. And if you had been out at about 1 or 2 in the morning, you would have seen a parade of golf carts going from Pepsi to Invesco, carrying the magnetometers and the bike rack and all of that across the highway. This whole long line of golf carts is how we moved everything. So we were in a state of frenzy and, you know, fever to try to get it all done overnight. Overnight, we had to build that overnight. And so it was quite taxing. And for me as the CEO, that's where my attention and my focus was. So it was hard to focus on the historicity of the moment because I was worrying about bike rack and bus routes and getting the mags in and how you go from a 20,000 person arena to a 70,000 person arena, and people were coming from all across the country, and where were the buses going to park, and was the Wi-Fi going to work, and were the jumbotrons going to be big, and was the seating? So it was hard to really get swept into the excitement of the history like most people were, because I was worrying about the mundanities.
Did you have a chance to step back and like really?
Yeah, you know, I think when it hit me was when the program began that night, and I was sitting in my seat in the suite, and the program began to unfold. And you know, before I could blink, he was coming out. Obama was coming out to make his speech, and then that was the moment where it was the last night. There was no more work to do at that moment. The next thing we'd do would be the tear down, and so I could just really stop and appreciate the history of the moment and to see the crowds, the diversity of the crowds, and how moved people were, and how personally people were feeling it. And to see him move. And at that point, we weren't sure that he was the shoo-in that everybody thought he was going to be. So, you know, we knew that we were going to leave Denver and still have some work to do. But at that moment, it's like, okay, we're making history here, and I am able to sit here with my family, because my family all came, and my nephew at that point, he was old enough to intern, and watch a Black man become the nominee of the Democratic Party. The same party just a few years earlier that had not allowed Fannie Lou Hamer to be credentialed. It's an amazing arc. The party that had been the party of Bull Connor and just now has as its leader a Black man. And it was a singular moment. I don't think I'll ever forget it. And my entire suite there was silence. Everyone knew not to talk. Everyone knew to just focus on the moment. And and it was something it's something I'll never forget.
Now,
Kudos to you.
I was going to say also at that convention, Joe Biden was nominated vice president. Now, Joe Biden is our presumptive Democratic nominee. He has a complicated background on race, which all was, as often will, be hashed out in a primary, past legislative alliances with Dixiecrats, some complicated statements even about President Obama. And then more recently, when he was interviewed, he had the comment about if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then quote, you ain't black. Now he's since apologized for that, said that he was joshing around just like he thought the host was. But statements matter, words matter, and we were wondering if you might be willing to comment not just on that statement, but also about maybe your experience or perception of Joe Biden as it relates to racial matters.
You're right. I think that Joe Biden has a complicated history. My first memory of him was the Anita Hill hearings.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, who's that guy? Right? So that was my first encounter or moment paying attention to the senator from Delaware who was the head of the Judiciary Committee. Just hadn't really given that much thought before, and I didn't appreciate the way Anita Hill was treated by the committee. And I don't know that it was obvious to me in that moment that it was Joe Biden. I don't know that I laid it at his feet as much as I was just annoyed with a whole lot of them and the way that I thought that she was being treated. And, the longer she sat, it seemed like the more she curled in on herself. I think he's tried to make amends for that. Since then, his legislative record is, probably as challenged as anybody else who's ever served in office. These things, it's hard. I worked on the Hill, so it's hard to make decisions sometimes. Or there are pieces of legislation that are not good, that are partly good, some not good. Of course, he was one of the authors of the crime bill, which today we say is problematic. Back then, everybody that I knew, electeds and community people alike, wanted something passed. Crack was running rampant in our communities, the crime, the numbers of people who were being affected, who were addicted. It was outrageous. And I was definitely living in Brooklyn then, and people were afraid to come out of their houses. Older people were getting hit over the head by, the guys from the crack house on the corner. They couldn't come to church. They couldn't buy their groceries. It was horrible. It was really, really horrible. And everybody wanted some kind of remedy to make the streets safer, to make our older people feel safer. It's easy to critique now in the light of history, but in that moment, everybody wanted that crime bill passed. Now, we can look back with clearer vision and say some of the provisions went too far, the unintended consequences of some of the provisions, and that's all right, but we didn't know that then. What we knew then is that we were in danger and we were afraid, and we wanted something that was going to get these crackheads and these drug dealers and all these other problem people off the street so we could live our lives again. I think he understands that. I haven't yet heard him say he understands all of it. He talks a lot about the federal sentencing versus the state sentencing, and the federal prisons versus the state prisons, which I think is a lot of minutia that most of us, it just goes over our head. We just know we lost a generation. Now we can say we lost a generation of young men and women to the crime bill. And I think he should acknowledge that and then try to figure out what the remedies are for that. But my from the rest of his record, Look, he's of an age, and I think lots of folks that are of an age have a history that some things they wish they could take back and they wish they couldn't change. But I'm a person of faith, and so I believe in grace and the redemption, and that everyone deserves another chance. So while he has done some things that I may not agree with, what I'm interested in is how has he lived his life since that moment? Has he recognized the error, recognized the mistakes, and then tried to live and legislate and lead based on his new knowledge and his new learnings? Or is he still stuck in the old thinking? If he's still stuck in the old thinking, and this goes for everybody, then I don't have no time for you. But if you have proven that you've had a change of heart, a change of mind, a change of leadership, then I think you deserve another chance, and deserve a chance to show that redemption. I don't believe in cancel culture. We all got something in our history, in our past, in our work life, our family life, that we rather not talk about, and we rather nobody knew about. But most of us improve. We recognize the error, we make a different decision, and we move forward. And I don't believe in holding people to one moment in time.
There was a recent Washington Post article about a letter that over 200 women in business, faith, the arts, entertainment, and more sign, urging presidential candidate Joe Biden to pick an African-American woman running mate. The letter reads in part, and I'm going to quote, "We urge you to seize this historic opportunity to choose a Black woman running mate who will fight for the issues that matter most to the American people and help deliver a decisive victory and a successful Biden presidency." Love it. I'm here for it. Why was this important to you? And we know he has several good choices on the list. Do you have a favorite?
I'm rooting for everybody Black, to quote Keith Gray. It was important to me, and the women who were the originators of that letter. And you're right, it had 200 signatories when we submitted it, and we've since added another 500. Wow. These are Black women leaders who lead organizations in their communities. And it was important because we believe that it's time, that we're at a moment in history when there are any number of Black women who are qualified to be the vice president, and they should be seriously considered. And given Vice President Biden's desire to make history and to change the arc of history, this is a perfect time to do it. Black women are the largest and most consistent voting bloc in the nation. 77% of Black women are registered to vote. 77%. That's a lot of folks, and that's the largest percentage of any demographic in the nation. We consistently vote Democratic. 90 and 94% of us vote Democratic. And now that we have people who've risen through the ranks, who've done the work, and who are as qualified as anybody else, why not a Black woman president, vice president rather? And the fact of the matter is, Joe Biden is going to need not just great turnout, he's going to need overwhelmingly enthusiastic turnout among the Black community. He doesn't need 2016, the Hillary Clinton level turnout, which was great in a normal year, 90, 92%, the John Kerry turnout, the Al Gore turnout. He needs Barack Obama level turnout. He needs 98% of Black people to vote for him to make this march, not only help him win, but make the margin cheat-proof. How do you do that in this era of COVID, where we may be talking about things we've never had to do before, such as turn out an absentee ballot vote, turn out a vote by mail vote? How do you do that? You put someone on a ticket who understands the needs and concerns of the African-American community, and that's a Black woman. So that's why it was important to us, and that's why we're continuing to talk about that and to sound that, ring that bell. We want them to be taken seriously. And all the talk of elected, they're not qualified. No, the talk about they're not qualified, qualifications is the new electability. First it was who's electable, and all through the primary we heard about electability. Now we hear about qualifications is the new electability. They are all qualified. There's a thread of sexism that runs through this, because when we go back to 2008, Barack Obama didn't have much experience either. He was a community organizer who served some time in his state legislature and a year and a half in the Senate before he decided to run for president. And we decided that that was okay, that he had the qualifications that he needed to be president. Now we've suddenly upped the bar when it comes to women, and they got to have all of this foreign policy and, you know, so many terms as a governor and so many terms as what changed? What changed? And the only thread there is that now we're talking about women, and now qualifications has become the new electability.
So I want to build off of that, because if you had asked me this time last year, and Candace was with me on this, my guess was that Kamala Harris was going to be our nominee. And she had a kickoff event in Oakland, California. Thousands of people there. It was huge.
It was amazing. Mm-hmm.
What happened where we got through this primary, and by the end of it, it was a list of white people.
2 old white guys, right?
not just that, even as it was narrowing. I mean, after Cory Booker was out of the race, you know, even like down the stretch, Amy Klobuchar, Pete Buttigieg, Elizabeth Warren, Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, those were the front runners. When Kamala Harris came into this, I mean, she opened up her campaign office in Baltimore. Candace and I were ready to do whatever we had to try to maybe set up Elevate outside her office to get her on the show, and still will, by the way. But I think many of us were shocked about how this played out. I just don't know if you saw something that when you saw certain things turn, you thought that it might go this way, or is it because of how we have our primaries scheduled, where it is predominantly in majority states, low population states, that we don't get African American vote until we get to South Carolina? What are the structural things that maybe the Democratic Party can look at so this doesn't happen again? Because I'll be honest, I don't think we ended up with the best candidate.
Well, I think I've been thinking about this a lot because, you know, as you know, I'm on the DNC's Rules and Bylaws Committee, and so we deal with the presidential nominating process. And, you know, I ponder often the issues that you raise, and I think there are a couple things that happened. One, you had a whole lot of people running. Now, context, there's always a whole lot of people running. You know, by the end of the process, if you check fec.gov, you know, you got 400-500 people running for president on the and I'm not exaggerating.
Yeah.
Anybody can go file their papers, and you got a lot of people. But the difference was this time we had a bunch of people, I think it was 24 or 26, who were like experienced members of Congress or mayors who, you know, were serious candidates, and not, you know, Joe the plumber. Got all respect to Joe the plumber. Don't at me. We love Joe the plumber. So I think the field was so diffuse and so large that voters could pick anybody, and you still wouldn't get a majority. Mm-hmm. Right? So you could go with Kamala, you could go to Pete, you could go to Amy, you could go to Joe, and, you know, and the debate season went for so long with the changing criteria, which then injected the issue of money and donors, which is the unspoken thing in all of this, because you got to raise money to run these campaigns. And the money became a factor in whether you made the debate stage. So where a candidate like Kamala or any one of them would have normally spent their time crisscrossing the country, shaking the hands of voters, talking to people, doing their events in state. Instead, they are chasing the dollars and chasing the donors, even though it was a small donor requirement. You're chasing these things and having these digital things and having these events in moneyed places so that you can make the debate stage. And I think it lessened the amount of retail politics that the candidates were able to do. And even for those who were, you know, United States senators, not well known outside their own states. So they needed to be in other places. So I think that sort of structural problem between the debate stage, between the donor requirement, between the field being so large, is problematic. Then, of course, there's the calendar with Iowa and New Hampshire. That's a whole other show. Happy to talk about that. It's a mess. Iowa and New Hampshire being first. We added under Howard Dean, Nevada and South Carolina to the early states. South Carolina ends up being fourth, but you've already had Iowa and New Hampshire who've gone first. Now, did that make any difference? No, because Joe Biden lost both of those. I think he was third or fourth or fifth in both of those states. But again, because of the large field, you could have, which is what I thought would happen, 4 different winners in the 4 early states. But I think the momentum Joe Biden got out of South Carolina on the, Black people hauling him over the finish line is what sent him into the victory that he ultimately achieved. Because once you start with South Carolina, you have a string of states that are heavily populated with the Black electorate, and it just sent him on a trajectory for which he should always be grateful.
We talk a lot on this show about elevating voices, and you co-wrote a book with Donna Brazile, Yolanda Caraway, and Minion Moore called For Colored Girls Who Considered Politics, that amplifies the voices of Black women in politics. So what is your advice to our listeners on how to best elevate voices that need to be heard as we look at the big solutions that we have to work on in this country? And what is your advice particularly to young women of color who are fighting for a voice at the table?
So first part first, let me just write that down. If you happen to be at a table, or you happen to be in the room, as Hamilton says, look around and see who's not there, whose voices aren't represented, and go get them. Either you represent them, but even better, go and get the people who are not there. Bring them to the table, bring the chair if you have to, bring them to the party so that they can be part of the process. Politics is about the art of addition, not subtraction. And so how we build a bigger table, a bigger tent, is the most important thing and the best way to elevate voices. You've got to be able to bring new voices to the table, help them find their place in some instances, but give them the room, give them the seat, give them the entree, the opening, if it is within your power to do. And if you're not the one setting the guest list, break down the door of the one who's setting the guest list. So so-and-so's not here. This voice is not represented. This community is not at the table. Now I can do my best, but it's better if they represent their own interests, and we will all be smarter for hearing from them. For young Black women, I'd say we get this question a lot when we do book events about young women who feel like, some folks have stayed too long at the table and they can't find their way. And our response generally is, the leadership line is short. Get in it. If you want to make a difference, make a difference. You don't have to ask for permission. Decide how you want to make a difference and go do it. If you can find a mentor, find someone who you think can help you, train you, coach you, talk you through, attach yourself. Build relationships, but be willing to do the work and understand you're not going to always get a yes. Every door is not going to swing open for you. It's not all sunshine and roses, and your idea is not always the best idea. But did you know what we remember? The people who work, the people who will take the task, whatever the task is, and do the work. The scripture says your gifts make room for you and bring you before great people. I believe that. So be prepared to do the work, be prepared for yeses, be prepared for nos, and attach yourself, learn something, get a mentor, a coach, a partner, and be prepared to walk into the room and represent your best self. That means do the homework. Be prepared and understand we are still Black in America. You gotta be better prepared. You gotta be smarter. It's not always fair, but that's the way it is. You got to walk into that room better prepared and smarter than anybody else, and understand that your experience at life most of the time has made you better prepared. You have a different perspective, and that perspective is valuable.
I co-host a podcast with someone who'd be a really good mentee, by the way, Reverend Daughtry. picking up people that might be heading into public office. Candace,
Nice.
are we going into our?
I'm gonna get a lot of text messages about that. A lot of text messages.
Are we going into our 8?
We are.
I'm a hard mentor, so you might not want me. But
I like hard now. I like hard. I was raised by a military daddy from West Virginia, so I'm good.
I don't love mentor. I only take the kids who or the women who don't mind me getting all up in every area of your life. So because it all knits together for me.
Yeah.
All right. I like this. These are the 8 questions we end all of our podcasts, which the first one is, what was the last book, movie, and music recommendation you made to a friend or family member? So have to hit all 3: book, movie, and music.
Book, movie, and music. Okay. Book. I just finished Hitting a Lick with a Straight Stick or Crooked Stick. Hitting a Straight Lick with a Crooked Stick. Zora Neale Hurston. An anthology of short stories, including some that have never been published before. It was excellent. So I've been recommending that. What's the next thing? Movie?
Movie and music.
Do TV movies count?
We can do that. Yep.
Everyone asked that. I love it. Yes.
I've been watching Mrs. America. I watch Little Fires Everywhere, and I am action hero thing, so junkie. So just the other night I watched Justice League. So any of those X-Men, superhero movies, I love those.
All right. And music.
Nice.
And what's the last one?
Music.
I'm not, I think the last piece of music that I sent to people that said, I love this song was Miracle Worker by J.J. Hairston. I'm a gospel music freak, so that one I love. It talks about the God of miracles, and so that's the last one I sent to people and say, you got to listen to this.
All right. What's the most unpopular, benign opinion you hold? And people always get tripped up on this because it's got to be unpopular and benign.
There ought to be child-free shopping hours in supermarkets and seating sections on airplanes.
That's good.
That's a first.
I think it checks all the boxes. And I think we should hold on to that as an example, Candace, because our examples are not.
No, I love it. That was a good one.
What podcasts, if any, are you listening to?
I'm not a real podcast girl, but when I listen, the one that I like is Brown Girl's Guide to Politics. One of my mentees, Ashanti Golar, produces it, and it's an excellent podcast that helps women who are interested in politics or interested in running for office to kind of get their feet wet.
Candace, right there. Candace.
See? I'm telling you right now, I'm getting, like, my phone, I already have one text. What's the best meal you've ever had? We usually ask, what's the best meal where you live? But you're between New York and DC, it seems. So what's the best meal in New York or DC that you've ever had? And it can't be something that someone makes for you.
The best meal I've had, I think there are 2. One is here in DC at this tiny restaurant called Bad Saint.
Yeah,
it is Filipino food. It is, and and when I say it's small, I think they seat 20 people. They only do 2 seatings a night or 2-3 seatings, and you got to be on time and the whole thing. People stand online to wait for cancellations.
I don't know that
the
one.
Best food, oh my God, ever.
Okay.
And they open reservations like every Wednesday at 11, and by 12 it's all booked. So that's, and then the other thing that I always do, if I'm in London, I go to Wright Brothers. And they make a dish that is a whole crab in a coconut ginger sauce, and honestly, you need a bib, and by the end, you just want to tip the whole bowl up and just drink it like soup. It's fantastic. Every time I'm there, I make sure I go to Wright Brothers.
I like that.
All right.
What activity or hobby have you rediscovered during quarantine?
Puzzles.
Ah.
Puzzles. Everybody knows I'm a knitter and all of that, but during quarantine, I rediscovered puzzles. I have a box of them. When I was in Philadelphia, people learned I like puzzles, so they sent them to me. So I do puzzles. It helps clear my mind. My favorite are Liberty puzzles. They're wooden, and the pieces are shaped like unlike anything you've ever seen. So no two pieces are alike, but they're shaped like umbrellas and women walking. And so it takes forever to do one, but those are my favorite. But I love that because it helps center you, clear your mind. You solve a lot of problems in your own head when you're doing puzzles.
Okay. What's the best advice you've ever received?
Be prepared. And it's not that serious.
That is good.
What is the biggest challenge you've experienced in your life, and how did you overcome it?
Actually, the biggest challenge for me was understanding and appreciating my own skills and abilities. Because I'm by nature shy and retiring, and I'm always willing to let somebody else be out front. And so when the time came and Howard Dean popped into my office and told me I was going to be the CEO, I said no, because I wasn't sure I could do it. And I wasn't sure I had the right skills for the job. And so, of course, I had to consult with all the people I consult with about these things, who convinced me that, yes, you will. What else? Tell us what the skills are. Who convinced me and not convinced me, but showed me that I did have the skills, the abilities, the qualifications to be the CEO of the convention. And I did, by all reports, a pretty decent job, but I had to get out of my own head and over my own self-doubt in order to do that. And so I think that stops a lot of us. It often has stopped me until I got to that point in my career where I could say, okay, you can do this, and stop telling yourself no and stop telling yourself you can't, because you can do it. You're qualified. You've been made for this moment. And so let's go.
We just had Cecilia Munoz on the show, who wrote a book called More Than Ready, and who worked in the Obama administration. She said the same type of thing about the whole imposter syndrome piece. And it just resonates with so many of us, particularly women of color. Mm-hmm. The last question that we end all of our podcasts with, and that we love hearing from our guests, is what do you think we need to do to elevate this country?
This is a simple thing and a hard thing. I think we have got to give each other a little more grace. And by that, I mean, really see our neighbor, whether they live next door to us or whether they live 1,000 miles away, people whose lives are not like ours. What is their life really like? What do they really experience? Can I see them and the challenges and the accomplishments and the worries and the successes as my own? And can I revel in them and pray for them and challenge them and compliment them as though they were my own? And where they fall short, can I give them a little more grace? That maybe it wasn't a good day, or maybe have the experience, or maybe it has zero to do with me and everything to do with what happened with them that morning. Can we as a society give people another chance, give people the opportunity to fail and then come back and be successful? Can we give each other a little more grace?
I love that. As we started the show saying, it's been a rough couple of weeks. And I'm a toughie. I think I have tough skin, and I think as I said, I was raised by a strong military father who was actually the first Black man to be at a certain level in the Department of Commerce, and just an amazing human being. Marched, with King and the whole 9 yards. So I feel like I have this grounding where I feel like I'm strong. And this week rattled me, but this interview has given me hope. And I'm so glad we were able to have you on today. The timing just worked so that it happened like this. And this was beautiful and wonderful. And I thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. And I look to see you. I'm sure I'll hear from you, Candace.
Yes.
Yes, you will. You definitely will.
Peace to both of you, Tom and Candace. I appreciate you having me on.
All right. Thank you. Bye,
Thank
Facebook
you so
Live.
much.